Welcome to the Art Channel. In this film we're visiting Courtauld Gallery in London in Somerset House to visit an exhibition of paintings by Peter Doig. Doig was born in Canada and then grew up in Scotland and in the West Indies.
This body of paintings reflects his life in Trinidad and also his move to London. So there are paintings that are of and about Trinidad and those from London, and also some interesting hybrids as he develops his practice. This painting is called Night Bathers, and interestingly it's painted between 2011 and 2019, and it really shows Doig's process. He goes back to work, he reimagines, he reinvigorates, he repaints over a long period of time, and he's very much, I think, about considering, and he talks about letting the painting happen, letting the painting breathe. And it is typical of his paintings in that it's unearthly, it's a bit of magic realism, it's something that might exist but probably doesn't exist.
The tropical setting is important, isn't it? And there's a phosphorescence of these marine organisms in the water. I mean, fundamentally, it's a distortion of time and of place, because we're looking at a night scene when you would normally see these bathers out during the day. But I think he takes that image of a Trinidadian beach and shifts it into the sort of edge of the night. And he says that he paints spaces, they're imaginary, they're fictional, they're drawn from these catalysts and prompts of the world he sees around him. But Doig's paintings remind me of short stories, really. They encapsulate these characters, this scenario that's not fully resolved and completed.
That's one of the fantastic things about them, isn't it? That's why I think we're drawn to them, because you can't help but make up the backstory. You can't help but imagine the narrative. How did they get here? Do they know each other? You know, this weird beach scene, as you say, that can't really exist. So there is that real sense of a mixture of reality and memory and art history references, and something that's quite intangible in a way.
They're almost sort of trippy, aren't they? There's something hallucinogenic about them. And the fact that they're laid out as if they're catching the sun rays, but in fact it's only the moon present in the sky. That it has all of the elements required to sort of take you on this imaginative journey, to sort of nudge you out of a sense of reality.
It's a good trick, isn't it? Because they're so sumptuous and so beautifully painted that you are drawn into a space that, as you say, isn't real. I mean, I don't know if these two people know each other. She's wearing this kind of 1960s bikini. It's redolent of lots of fashion images in a way. It's a bit rock and roll. It's a bit magic realism, and it certainly can't be real.
And of course there are all these associations of the Caribbean with a sense of sensuality, of luxuriance, of being in the sun, I'm enjoying all of those scents and sensations really of the tropics and the Caribbean, but it's got a slight hint of uneasiness to it because of that displacement. So it's a really good example of how seductive his paintings can be, while at the same time they slightly knock you off balance. We're looking at music, two trees, and actually I think this is my favourite painting in the exhibition. It's much smaller than his larger canvases, and we have three figures here. Two of whom are playing musical instruments, and there's a lady on a horse, and she is the painter's wife, really. But it's again a very dreamy, rather magical scene. Pleasure, really, of enjoying this particular environment, of the tradition in Trinidad of playing music outdoors, and that central figure there is wearing a costume associated with a local pop group called the Rockefellers.
It's a beautiful painting, isn't it? And it's, as you say, much smaller and kind of more intense than some of the other works. I like the way the picture plane is split up with the three figures. I think that's really effective, in this tree on the left-hand side. is a beautiful bit of composition. And then, as you say, his wife on the horse on the right-hand side, turning back into the painting. So they look very casual, they look very dreamlike. Actually, they're incredibly tight bits of composition in a way. And of course, you know, you think about this canvas, you look at it and you think of Gauguin always.
Oh, absolutely, because in this collection downstairs is a famous painting by Gauguin called The Dream, which shows a rider in the distance, further away than in this painting. But nevertheless, there's that connection between that sense of roaming on a horse and domestic sort of life inside. But here we're just looking at outside, and Doig is really connecting music to a notion of just sort of a reverie, really, of sort of going with instinct and a relationship with the animal.
She looks quite uncomfortable.
She does a little, but maybe that's there's some artistic license there, just to sort of emphasise that posture on the horse.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really beautiful composition, as I said, with the musical instruments on the diagonal, and then her arm and the tree behind her. It's really, as I said, they look so easy, so casual, but they're really beautifully kind of fitted together and constructed.
And there's that nice suggestion of his movement as the neck of the guitar swings out of the frame, as if he's swaying to the rhythm. I mean, and finally we should mention, of course, the technique, because Doig is very well known for this kind of staining of the canvas, whereby the pigment becomes sort of locked into the weave of the canvas, and so you get this almost watercolour effect, a bleeding of colour across the canvas.
They're very evocative, aren't they? And he's incredibly influential. You can walk into lots of exhibitions and see paintings a bit like this. He's really influenced other young painters, but they're not Doig's. Doig, you know, is unique, and as you say, he stains the canvas with these slightly off colours. They're always slightly acid, slightly wrong in a way. So these supposed images of paradise are not. They're always tinged with a kind of strangeness, an ethereal feel, and a wrongness in a way, if that makes sense. This painting is called Alpinist, and it was made between 2019 and 2022. And I guess it's quite a familiar subject for Doig. He returns to the mountains, and he was, as a kid, sort of quite outdoorsy, lots of mountain climbing, skiing, kayaking. So it's very much part of his sort of his physical memory in a way. This painting has the Matterhorn in the background, and this strange skiing harlequin in the foreground. They're strange, they're odd, they don't work. It's bizarre. And you get also an incredibly clever depth. I mean, you're looking across miles and miles of pine forest with this strange figure right at the front of the picture plane. And then the rather odd, very dense skis behind the figure. It's quite an extraordinary painting, and the figure is looking down. I don't know if they're about to leap off the mountain.
And there are lots of nice art historical references to the Harlequin, used as a motif by Picasso and also Cézanne. It reminds me also of German Romantic painting of the early 19th century, Caspar David Friedrich, that notion of the isolated, solitary figure confronting the sublime nature. It's a kind of struggle for, existential struggle for the individual in the face of all of these elements, but also something quite sort of necessary. You go out to test yourself in the world and you discover yourself. And there is a sort of buoyancy or vivaciousness about this costume and the stoicism of this character. He sort of reaches the top of the ridge there. It's like he sort of completed the climb.
Yeah, so this is man against the elements in a harlequin outfit. Yeah, it's a strange way to test yourself in the world, isn't it? But it is, as you say, it's heroic. It has lots of art history references, which we can often recognise, but it's also ridiculous. You know, these are not real people or real spaces. So a real mixture of art history, of memory, of reading, of music, all of these things rolled into these unearthly paintings.
And I'm drawn to this foreground here, which looks almost like water, like waves. So you had a suggestion in the mountains of the sea too. So it's got that slightly surreal quality in the painting.
They trick you into thinking they're real spaces, don't they? Because they're so beautifully constructed, and they're not. You're thrown, you're slightly put off kilter by them.
It's almost as if we're looking at a painting by Turner, you know, crossing the Alps. So there are all these nice and neat and rather wry references to art history, but fundamentally we're confronted with this strange character who looks so sort of displaced. Nevertheless, it has a heroic quality. You know, there is a sort of suggestion of a personal triumph here, of climbing up, carrying these skis that look like a cross.
I'd have to disagree. I don't think it's heroic. I think it's ridiculous. And I enjoy that. You know, man against the elements. You look silly, you're in a
So there's an absurdity.
Yeah, it's completely absurd. And I don't know why you'd have to go up a mountain to test yourself personally. So for me it's quite odd on lots of levels.
It's as if Doig is satirising that impulse to climb mountains and conquer mountains. This large painting is called Canal, and it was finished this year, and it represents Doig's move back to London. It's the Regent's Canal in North London, so it's familiar to him. And we see his son there, painted on the lower right, having his breakfast there with these 2 eggs. And the backdrop, or the primary scene really, is this red bridge over the canal. So it's a jarring, disjointed fusion of a domestic interior with this very distinctive site in London.
It's a real collage of a painting, isn't it? Because it was started in Trinidad as a kind of small, a modest painting for and of his son. And actually this is very redolent of Matisse's piano lesson from 1916. And then, as you say, Regent's Canal, not glamorous, in North London. He did see this guy, he spotted a man like this coming along the canal. But the bridge he came back to again and again, so I think it was much quieter, and it became this dominant red feature across the middle of the painting. And he talks about wanting to make a contemporary painting that connects to something like a post-impressionist would make, a kind of modest urban scene, and not wanting to kind of stray into whimsy or sentimentality. So it's a tricky business.
And there's so many echoes of other painters. I'm reminded of Edvard Munch there in that kind of stylization and introspection psychologically. I'm reminded of Gustav Klimt in The Bridge. So there are all these sort of tips of the hat to painters who interest Peter Doig, but Doig manages to create a painting that synthesizes all of those different ideas and make something that feels very contemporary, very kind of located in a particular place.
And he's unashamedly a fan of Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, which comes in and out of fashion. He's painted since he left college in the 80s, when people were making video and conceptual art, and YBAs were doing sort of more supposedly daring things, think of the Chapman Brothers and Emin, etc. And he has just painted all the way through those decades and become a really good painter.
He's, you know, had this commitment to figuration during all of these other trends, as you mentioned, and he's really triumphed in creating engaging, engrossing paintings. I think that's why these pictures have this sort of underlying power to them that makes them really successful.
Yeah, these paintings make tens of millions of pounds. These are very expensive paintings when they come onto the market, and I think I'm not interested in how much they make, but I'm interested in the fact that the subject matter, as you say, is really quite modest, it's quite ordinary, it's a little bit odd, and yet people can really connect to these paintings.
Yeah, and then as I was saying, I think there's a strong sense of narrative, but you are sort of floating through this narrative, and It's not, all the loose ends are not tied up. So it allows you to head off in so many different directions with the subject.
He does wear his art history lightly, doesn't he? It's all there, but it's synthesized into something completely different.
This time, we ask that you turn off your portable electronic devices and turn them to airplane mode.
Thank you so much for watching this film on Peter Doig at the Courtauld in London. We really appreciate your support at the Art Channel.
Please do subscribe to the channel and take a look at our other films in the library.